You're listening to Systemic Era Podcast. The failure was designed.
Lawyers remain in disbelief over fascist Hellscape July 4 display in D.C., based on an article by Olivia Rossane. Common Dreams. The Capitol-led white supremacists stage a propaganda parade. A brief fact pattern. Hundreds of masked members of Patriot Front, a white nationalist hate group, moved through Washington, D.C. on July 4, riding the metro and marching around Capitol Hill while carrying Confederate and U.S. flags. They chanted slogans about reclaiming America, then left by train. The reporting captures the image cleanly. White nationalists in the nation's capital on the anniversary of independence, using public space to advertise the politics of exclusion. Who holds power here? Patriot Front does not hold formal state power. That is the obvious point, and it is also the trap. Groups like this really need office to matter. They need visibility, coordination, and a public stage. They got all three. The real institutional power in this story is the state's monopoly over public order, public space, and the symbolic center of the country. When hundreds of masked extremists can march around Capitol Hill and ride the metro without disruption, they are not exercising democratic participation. They are exploiting the state's tolerance for performative menace. That is power to not rule, but access. The performance is the message. The group's politics are not hidden. The source notes its white ethno-state ideology, its anti-immigrant exclusion, and its anti-Semitic and xenophobic core. So the march is not a misunderstanding or an awkward bit of civil disobedience. It is propaganda. Patriot Front's signature move is theatrical camouflage, Confederate flags, U.S. flags, patriotic slogans, masks, shields, and discipline formation. This is not accidental pageantry. It is an attempt to launder explicit white nationalism through familiar national imagery. The group wants to look like the country while announcing who it thinks should be removed from it. That matters because fascist movements do not begin by confessing their program in plain institutional language. They begin by normalizing the aesthetic of dominance and treating public intimidation as just another kind of politics. Misdirection works both ways. The most dangerous lie in stories like this is not always overt sympathy. Sometimes it is procedural flattening. No incidents reported is not the same as no harm. A masked white nationalist march through the Capitol is already the harm. The point is not whether they threw a punch. The point is that they were able to claim public terrain and force everyone else to absorb the message. Another layer of misdirection is the patriotic costume itself. Patriot Front borrows the symbols of the Republic while targeting the people the Republic has always struggled to protect. That is not contradiction from their point of view. It is strategy. The American flag in their hands is not a symbol of shared civic belonging. It is a stolen prop in a racial theater production. And the media's visual instinct can soften the blow if it stays at the level of spectacle. A column of masked men on the metro is alarming, but the image should not eclipse the structure underneath it. Organized white supremacy testing whether the public will treat it as an aberration or as a recurring feature of American life. What the images say. The most important detail in the source may be the one that requires the least commentary. A black woman sits on the metro as masked white nationalists prepare to march. That is the country in one frame. One side is simply trying to move through public life. The other is staging a racial claim on public space. That contrast exposes the real political function of these stunts. They are not aimed at converting everyone. They are aimed at reminding targeted communities that the street, the station, and the Capitol itself can be occupied by hostile men who believe the nation belongs to them first. This is why symbolic actions are never merely symbolic. Symbols organize fear. Fear disciplines behavior. Discipline is a form of power. The larger pattern. Patriot Front is not an isolated curiosity. It is a mobile expression of a broader authoritarian instinct that thrives when institutions treat white supremacy as an optics problem instead of a governance problem. The group's march is a test of whether the public sphere will absorb racial intimidation as background noise. It should not. The lesson is not that democracy was mocked for a few hours in Washington. The lesson is that democratic institutions keep making room for organized anti-democratic force to advertise itself in the open, wrapped in national language and protected by procedural indifference. That is how extremism stops looking extreme. It becomes scenery. A democracy that cannot deny white nationalists a stage is not being challenged from the margins. It is revealing how much deference it still gives to people who want a country built by exclusion, enforced by intimidation, and sanctified with stolen patriotism. You've been listening to Systemic Error. Thanks to Raw Story for today's article. With the automated voice of Kiesel, thanks for listening.